Hello, welcome to this video. Glad you're here. Glad you're tuning in, watching this. I've got a guest today, Erin Geddes, who is a children's book author who's joining me. And we're going to talk about this book that Erin has written and illustrated, by the way. We should give you the illustration shout out. That I think is a really cool book to know about, and we're going to talk about why. So, welcome, Erin. Glad you could join me here.
Yes, my pleasure.
This is your book, and that's okay. I'm wired differently. And there you are, author and illustrator. And this book, of course, is about neurodiversity and focused on kids as a children's picture book. So, I definitely have some thoughts I want to share about this book, which I think are really cool for therapists to understand how they can use it, parents as well. Um, but let me turn it over to you first, Erin. This is your creation. Tell us a little bit about like what's the purpose of the book? Like why did you write it and kind of how are you hoping it's used?
Well, the purpose of this book really is trying to, there's a lot of books out there that who's it speaking to? I mean, is it speaking to those who have the special needs? Which a lot of times, yes, they are. But there are, and then there's other, say self-esteem books for kids. It's like it's okay to be you. You can sing really loudly and wear clothes that don't match, but otherwise it's kind of like it's okay to be you as long as you still kind of fit in these parameters. Sure, then knock yourself out.
Right.
But when you were neurodivergent, for me personally growing up, and I know many others, and we tend to push the boundaries of what is socially acceptable and how people feel comfortable.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and that can be hard. And so when something makes you feel uncomfortable, kind of your natural reaction is to push away and to exclude. Um, and so I wanted the examples in this book to be some of those ways that we kind of just don't do things typically, not just a little bit differently typically, but
Right.
like sometimes we can do it very differently.
Right.
And, but, we all have to coexist. So I really wanted this book to speak to both sides of the coin, neurotypical, neurodiverse, neurodivergent, but also just to to be aware, but also of things that maybe are not as obvious
Hmm.
to someone who maybe doesn't have the lens that's as trained to
Yeah.
it. People ask and say, "Oh, is it, what kind of book is it?" I'm like, "Well, technically a children's book, but it's kind of like a family movie. There is something
Mm.
in it for everyone to get out of it, whether you are a child who has these hidden special needs, or you're a child and do not, or if you're an adult, or you're a parent, or you're a teacher, or you are a autistic adult that can go, yes, I can relate to that even as adult,
Right.
because guess what? Autistic kids grow up into autistic adults, but
Every
it's
time.
not an autism book. It's not just an ADHD book. There's a lot of different things that, because of comorbidities and overlaps, that are part of this book.
Absolutely. You said something in there in description that this book does that I thought was really neat. It is this dual combination of pointing out to maybe the neurodivergent child reader that differences in these ways that they are different is okay. That's a very strong message in the book, while at the same time pointing out to maybe the person who doesn't understand neurodivergence who's reading it to be accepting of these differences and even valuing them. Like they're okay. They're not something that I should be looking at as there's something wrong with that person or I need to try to change it. And that it's sort of like you are sending, the dual message at the same time with the way you wrote the book, which I thought was really cool because as you mentioned, it's not just sort of targeting one side, but anybody could pick up the book, whether you're an adult or a child, you're neurotypical, you're neurodivergent, and you are going to learn more about what neurodiversity is and what this looks like. Uh, it is very nicely illustrated by you too. We should
Thank
point that
you.
out. I wanted to show an example of a page, and it really is like each page is a vignette in a way where you are doing just what you said. You're pointing out this maybe typical social situation, and there's a lot of examples in the book. And then you're showing the message that this neurodivergent person maybe does this differently than the way everybody else is doing it in that vignette, or the way, quote unquote, maybe society is expecting people to do it. And then that difference is okay. And that message is really carried out throughout the whole book. I mean, if you read this book and you get to the end and you don't understand that differences are okay, you didn't read the book, right? Like, I mean, you really capture that really well, which I think is so neat. I know that that is really helpful, like for the kid clients I work with, for sure, because they get that message loud and clear through the book. And I really liked that part about the book as well because you've got so many different examples that I think people would pick up the book. Maybe it's a therapist who's using it to help a child understand themselves better and their neurodivergence better. Maybe it's the child reading it themselves, right? But I think there's so many examples in here that in those situations, the child is going to see themselves in the book. They're going to go, oh, that's something that I do in that situation, right? And then they're going to get that affirming message that the difference is okay, which I think is really cool. That is one of the reasons I like this book. Um, when you sent this to me and you talked about it, one of the things I really liked about it was I feel like that's what I do all the time is I'm constantly communicating some version of differences are okay. They're not bad. You don't need to feel shamed. You don't need to feel like you're a problem because you navigate differently in some way. I feel like I'm constantly in my therapy work, communicating that in some way or another. And then I got this book and I'm like, this is what this book is communicating, full on for neurodivergent kids. So as far as usage, I mentioned, of course, I think child therapists, play therapists, this is great for their playroom. This is great for their therapy work. I think it could be even a great book for parents to read.
Yes, especially because even there's a lot of unwritten expectations that we as parents are placed of how our children are supposed to be and act and should want to desire to do these things. Or, you have a baby and you have these grand plans of the things that you plan to do as the child grows up, where, a birthday thing. And then you have this child who is not a big birthday party person.
Yeah.
And that sometimes can be kind of this blow, be like, I had this expectation, I had this thing, and you're like, okay, but you're kind of normalizing that not every kid desires to have a big party. Or, well, it might be nice to be invited, and could you give the child the option? Do you want to go to someone's celebration, all right, giving them the option of yes, I do, or I know, or I do, but it's going to look different of how I participate in the party versus other kids.
Right. Those are such huge messages because you also sometimes, as the parent and caregiver, you know this, and we should mention, writing this book, from your own lived experiences as a parent and also a neurodivergent person, like you have a lot of perspective here you're putting into the book. And this as a caregiver, I do too, that sometimes you just feel a lot of pressure from the society you're in as a parent to like, oh, I'm supposed to go to the party and we're supposed to look like that, right? And you can even feel that pressure as a parent. I think one of the nice messages about this book's directly to the parents is, no, you don't have to. You don't really, and it's going to be okay. If it looks differently and you do it differently, really, it's okay. And sometimes, parents just need that reassurance. Need somebody to come along and say that to them. They may be feeling it, they may be thinking it themselves, but they may be kind of hanging out there on an island where they're not getting any kind of affirmation themselves, in understanding their neurodivergent child. And that can be really powerful to them. Well, I've used it both ways already, just so you know.
Good.
reading it to kids in therapy, I always kind of have a general therapy goal of, let's understand our neurodivergence better from an affirming way. And then I kind of make it a habit of these books I like. If I'm working with a child in therapy and the parents out in the waiting room, I'm like, here, hey, read this book while you're waiting in the therapy room. And then if you have any questions, we'll talk about it. So I've also used it that way, just giving it to parents to read to help them grow and learn as well, especially if they're new to the topic. And
Or the typical like ASQ at the pediatrician's office. And I remember with my own kids, they would ask certain things. Well, do they do this? And it's like, well, not that I don't know if because I haven't given them a ball and a cup and a string and like because it didn't bear, but then you can use the book just of someone who may be seeking and go like, all right, here's a book. Does anything here maybe kind of ring a bell or you're noticing, or it may not be exactly that way, but similar? Because sometimes parents don't even know what to say. I mean, unless you know what to look for, it's overwhelming
yeah,
when you're
yeah,
questioning if there's something more in play with your child's development milestones.
right. So even as a tool for parents to maybe think, oh, maybe my child's neurodivergent, and maybe this is something I need to look into more and understand if that is the case, right?
Or the evaluator, some from the clinician,
Right.
where you
Yes.
have that meeting and they throw, and you're like, I don't know, in my mind, it's like, oh no, they don't do that because they didn't do it in that exact way.
Right. Yes. Well, you're reminding me of like, I think one of my favorite things about this book. I love a good sort of just we're talking about and trying to help you understand what it means when we say neurodiversity and neurodivergent. I love kids' books that have that theme to them because from professionals to parents, whether and educators, therapists, it doesn't matter who the professional is, the general public, there's just a lot of people who do not understand neurodiversity or neurodivergence. And I love resources like this that just give a nice, clear message to help people start to understand what we're talking about. When we say neurodiversity affirming, what are we talking about when we say a neurodivergent person, what are we talking about in terms of, we don't just mean they've got a diagnosis slapped on them. We mean understanding them as an operating system of a human being and respecting and valuing the way that they navigate. And, that's a really clear message in your book in all the vignettes from start to finish.
Because it's almost like just because there's many who they fall just short of having enough boxes checked that puts them over the other side where they would be given a clinical diagnosis. But guess what? They still have these needs, whether they had enough to say, all right, we're calling it as autism or ADHD or whatever it is, but they have a need.
Yeah.
And how can you just meet their needs? Because that's just what they're desiring and is helpful.
I love that. And I think that you have added to, you know, the community with this book that you put together. I've certainly shared some of my favorite things about it. I definitely want to tell people how to get it so they can buy it. Again, whether you're a professional in any setting, therapist, educator, this would be a good book to have handy, or a parent who just wants it and to read it for yourself, to read it with your child. Uh,
Or the
any,
family who has a
oh,
grandparent where it's like, well, there was hardly anyone who had this diagnosis, this thing, and they just, some things just don't, it's a hard concept because those also were things that were not really talked about, shared. It was kept very quiet, or,
yeah.
the individual were institutionalized.
Oh my gosh. Absolutely. Extended family members, right? Give it to them for a Christmas present, right? Like, listen, you need to read this. You need to understand, your grandchild, you understand your nephew, your niece. Well, any final thoughts from you? You created this jewel here that you want to leave viewers with before we tell them where
Um,
they can get this book.
sure. Well, oh man, talk about, I call it my brain farts, where I have it and it just,
Yes.
um, oh, I had it and I know it's going to come to me. Ah, yes. So when I was going through the writing process, and you think, well, what's kind of the target age and such? And one thing where I know a lot of people who are the people who they're like with their neurodivergent, thinking that they associate that there is always an intellectual disability that accompanies it, where a lot of the times, no, an intellectual disability is completely separate than a lot of these other diagnoses. It
Yeah.
complicates things, yes, but whether a child is verbal or nonverbal, I did not want to discredit just because you're a kid and just because you might be autistic, you might be, ADHD, or you have apraxia, or all the other things that say that you are not intelligent. So I purposely did not dumb down all the vocabulary. There's a word in there, suspicious.
Mhm.
I know that's how I learned larger words, from context. And I was around a lot of adults and the things I would just kind of absorb and pick up, not that it was formally taught to me in school. Um, so I didn't, I said, I want to give, hey, there's some who are going to pick this up and that's great. And there's some that won't. Um, and I have read the book to a functional academics class. And the teachers were like, well, I just don't know how it's going to go and such, but they had me come in, and I will say it was probably my favorite group of reading the book to, because they had no expectations out of me, except I was someone new and warm and friendly. And I read the book and someone would kind of come it close and you could see the teacher trying to bring him back. And to me, I'm like, yeah, they're just curious and I don't have a problem with that. And then after I read it, I got down on the floor and we looked at the pages closely and I would, oh, do you see this? Oh, and dinosaur. I'm like, yeah, is there a green dinosaur here? And it was just so warm and someone would get real close, want to sit in my lap. I mean, it was just, they had a good time. And um, just to make through this book. So I also knowing, because there's some that are even harder. So one of my kids has dysgraphia. And there is a nod to dysgraphia in this book. And knowing that also of sometimes people more known of dyslexia, I really wanted to make sure that the copy was as dyslexia friendly as possible
Yeah.
to the letter spacing, line spacing, the font, what it was against, so that a child who wanted to read who maybe was dyslexic could do that. Or even if a child who could not read words, with the exception of one bubble, because there was no other way to get around it, if a child is speaking,
Mhm.
the text bubbles are in pictures. So then
Yeah.
they can still feel like they can know what that other child is saying and
Right.
participate in that way. And to show even where there's a child in here who has vitiligo, but where do you ever really see a child with vitiligo normalized, except a book about a child who has vitiligo?
Right.
Or just the whole thing that, oh, you couldn't be autistic and be in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Or
Right.
I wanted to take some of these other special needs and say, look, they could or could not, but look, they can go together. It's not that people kind of see this, it's one or the other,
Mhm.
they can't be both.
Right.
Um, and in my own attention to detail, personal, all of the illustrations in the book are made from photographic textures that I've taken in the last 18, 20 years. Um, whether it was someone's face, so someone's eyes, someone else's ears, someone's nose, someone's mouth, someone's skin, someone's hair, and they get cut out and then put together, including just there's a child on a scooter, and there are 17 plus different pieces that make that scooter up.
Wow.
And nothing is AI'd. It is all something that I've taken because I would pay attention to the little details. I would take my camera places. I mean, I took my camera to Costco and I found that the skin on the fish was really interesting and fascinating. So I took a
Uh-huh.
picture of it because, I might be able to use that as, oh, there is a fish, or hell, this
Right.
scale could be translated into something that has nothing to do with the fish, but it's still fascinating. It's the stuff that when you're neurodivergent, we tend to pay attention to some of the small little details of the joys of life that other people are too busy going through.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure there's people wondering why have I stopped in the middle and I'm taking a picture of a floor at a museum at the Space Museum in Florida.
Right.
But I thought like, ooh, look at this texture and look at this patina. And
Uh,
that was interesting. That was art. And so everything is personally taken and put together to make these worlds and to show children of all different blends, or if there's an adult shown, it's like, all right, neither, are of one ethnicity. Some are of many
yeah.
a blend.
Hmm.
And I wanted this to be seen that if you were to go out in the real world, all right, mom doesn't necessarily look like the daughter. Maybe it's a step parent. Maybe they
Yeah.
are family because of adoption. However, the family came together, it's not always going to look matchy matchy.
Yeah. I'm glad you added that because this book is full on diversity. There's a lot of diversity representation, and that explanation of everything from your writing style to the illustrations. I mean, the thoughtfulness is in the book and in every page, and as well as this the thoughtfulness of the diversity. I really appreciated that. I saw it right away, and I loved that part because you don't always see that in books, and it's so important. Okay, so I like this book. You like this book. People should get this book. It's on Amazon, so they can
That's
find it on
one
Amazon,
place.
and then other places they can find it online.
Redemption Press is my publisher. If you are,
Okay,
if you have feelings about Amazon and everything else that
right.
goes, if you are have the means to be able to buy it through my publisher, um, it is for me as the creator, the margins are a lot kinder to me than on Amazon. But I get it. Amazon for some, it's a way of life, how it
Right.
is. I don't fault anyone, but if you can do it through the publisher, that is that is really, really appreciative.
And that's Redemption Press again, right?
Yes.
Okay. And here's the book, everybody. Go find it, get it. I know if you're a play therapist or mental health professional watching, this is a good one to add to your collection. Well, thank you, Erin, for doing this work and putting affirming this out into the world. We need more of that. And thanks for joining me on this video.
Oh, it's a real honor to just for someone who doesn't have these advanced degrees and have someone to say, oh, hey, you did something, you really nailed it on the head, that didn't meeting a need that didn't exist.
Yes. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. Come back, watch more videos. Take care.